It's Friday the 3rd of May. We're at the most wonderful church of St Petrox in Dartmouth, a place called Dartmouth, right down the boundaries of Dartmoor and the provinces of that. Now, what's really good about this particular church in the city, it's steeped, absolutely steeped in Knights Templar history, going back to the Crusades, going back to the days. Now, you will hear on history that this area and this particular part of the castle itself was built in around about 1330 the year. But again, like most places, the site goes back so far beyond that. But as you can see, if we look around, the sense, this is the only church, if you're ever in this area, that's worthwhile spending time at. There's some very nice churches, but this is the church, especially if you're into Templarism, into knightly virtues and hoods and things. And what we see, there's so many links here. I mean, particularly, there's so many links here to, oddly enough, there's a lot of French connection here. And when we get around the other side, you're going to see the Cambridge connection as well, which is quite interesting for anyone researching this at Cambridge University or any of the colleges there, especially Gonville College in particular. So, but as we come around, you can see you've got the skull and bones there, but you haven't got the cross. The cross is sort of behind the skull. And that was always pretty, the seas, the merchants, the piracy, but actually it means more than that. I mean, it means knightly virtues, which is why the Knights Templar used the skull as some kind of worship, because it worships and recognises the fact that humanity has existed. It's had its time, it's had its point beyond reason. So as we go around here, you see it's very nice to see that all the main memorials and entombments are visible to the naked eye. They're not covered up with carpets and things. Now obviously if it has more visitors, then yes, it would need to be covered, I guess, but I think it's about quality rather than quantity these days. We can see up here we've got a connection directly to some of the shield signs of the Fordham line, which is not hardly surprising because, as we know, the Fordhams go back to Desposiny, and which goes back to the line of Christ. So we can see, and we also know from history and from knowledge that the Fordham line also goes back to France eventually, into Ireland, into France and beyond, and ends up in a place called Westphalen in Germany. Westphalen. So all these places seem to interconnect over what to some would be a very minuscule point in time. So coming around to here. There's one particular tomb that's worth researching and looking at. I'll have to come down here for a moment. We're wanting to do this part in two parts, really. In particular, John Hodge, 1092. Yes, the castle was later, the church has been here for a long time, as I already predisposed. But note the actual year 1092, and note the actual, I don't know how much of the lighting we can get on there to see the skull. Yeah, perfect. So what we've got here, let's get some photos. We've got the skull, but it doesn't really look like a skull, does it? It looks more like some kind of disfigured human, really. We've got the crossbones, which look more like swords. So they're crossed swords. This is where it changes dramatically. Now, this is part of what we call the Celtic wheel. And then we've got our aspect, which looks almost like an egg timer, but it's actually showing the sign of Templarism there. And how the virtue and choice, which is what these represent. Virtue, the top section, which is ironic that the rebellion extinction or extinction rebellion, they're using this actual symbol as their current one in the news and in the reels. But this is by virtue and by choice. So it screams Templarism, it screams knightly virtues all the way through this church. And we can see that when we come across to the main focus window. Here. Now, like most windows, they tell a story, they tell a tale. If we just come a little bit closer, we can see that. Look at the wonderful, we've got St. Paul, You've got St Petra, we've got St George, we've got St Peter, and how they are all resting in some form of knightly virtue all the way throughout. Not sure about the story of the old St George. I'm not quite sure how many people believe the slaying of a dragon, to be fair. It's the slaying of something else, but the dragon is more symbolic or emblematical to make it tangible to a story. But as we come around here, let's have a look at the Cambridge connection, which is always quite interesting. Now here we've got the Sea Gonville, as my learned friend Janice, who's the keen filmer, she already picked up on that and recognised that straight away. So we've got Gonville College in Cambridge, so it's connected into the university, which is no great surprise because Cambridge was founded with Templar money, whether people accept that or not. It's Templar funds that made Cambridge what it is today, as it goes round. So coming down here, we've got some lovely fields around the place. It was quite interesting that only a short while ago, when I was walking around this way, I had a presence of feeling something coming across here, and that was evident to me. I had full visual and emotional and sensing of a presence. Now, anyone who comes here, if they don't feel something in this church, there's something seriously wrong with them, because they should feel something here. This is one of the most sacred places in this particular part of the lands. So you can see we've got the royal flags there, the main, and again we're talking about knightly virtues. You can see that a lot of it's in Latin. I don't know how much of the Latin we can pick up there, but we've got King by judgments, and got thy knightly values, Clovelly in Latin, knightly values. So that's all there as well within the symbol, the seals that link into my family, the Neville line. So barring any other disturbances, we can continue. So what's really nice about this, and in particular, I think it's really nice. Sometimes these plaques are covered and are covered away from the church, but in particular Corinthians 10:16, the cup of blessing which we bless is not the communion of the blood of Christ. So that's interesting, isn't it? You can read that in any way you wish. So when we read it, it was not the communion and the blood of Christ. So what are we saying? That the cup isn't the blessing then? No, it's not, is it? Because the people that are practicing the belief, they're the blessing, not the material object. And that's what Corinthians 10:16 is trying to say, that it's not about material objects that matter. Yes, they're nice for focus, nice for energy, but it's not about them at all. It's about the people that are recreating, that are enacting the rites, the rituals, the practices. And that we've got some other nice, and this is a nice touch. I like the fact that they've got some ivy rolling around, which almost makes it look like the crown of thorns, which is again rather nice, and very pretty seasonal flowers here, the little bluebells and things, which is lovely. It's got some nice inscriptions and things on there. But let's just draw our attention to the service one up here. You've got Victor MacAndrew. Now this is quite interesting. This ties us in. There's a few things here that tie in all the lines. Now bear in mind it says Victor MacAndrew. Obviously it was spelled Mac in various other forms, but they're all part of the same line. In the churchyard there we've got one of my relatives from the Clark family that I just took a picture of his memorial stone. Now he only died in 2002, one of the last living relatives of the Clarks that are down in this particular area. And as we know, the Clark family spawned out of Honiton and thereabouts. So all in all, it's a beautiful church. And there's just one little other section to look at, which will be the Lancelot collection, which will tie us into our trips and travels for tomorrow. Okay, so in this particular stained window, we're still in St Petrarch's Church, beautiful, beautiful church in Dartmouth. We've got the connection to Germany, first of all. So on the believe it or not, on the left-hand side, we have a lot of German connection. On the right-hand side, we have the connections to Lancelot. Now, what we're looking at there is Lancelot de Sposigny, which, as we know, is one of the ancestors of the Fordham line. Now that makes total sense because we've already mentioned that the Fordhams spawn out of Westphalen, a place called Westphalen in Germany. They come into France. From France, they stay there for many centuries. They come onto England, which then links us into the Arthurian legend in readiness for Tintagel. Okay, it's Saturday the 4th of May. We're in the beautiful village of Clovelly. Now, Clovelly has been privately owned for many, many years, and that's why it's it's quite unspoilt, really. But the Church of All Saints, I mean, this has been here since 600, it says 630, but that can't strictly be true. There's been a place of gathering, for want of a better term, since the early 500 AD here. And that's pretty factual, because Lancelot Desposny, who is actually my 48th great-grandfather, was here in this area around about 530 AD. So that's quite fascinating. Now we know that the Desposnys then link on to the Fordham line, but we also know that the Fordham line and the Clark line, sometimes the Clark line is mentioned with an E or without an E, it's all the same in many respects. The Clarks and the Fordhams have pretty much been in bed with each other since the dawn of creation. So that's quite interesting. And we'll see references to Clark and Fordham in this very same church. As you can see, it's nice to see that all the original artefacts, it's had a lot of restoration work over the years, and in particular, which I always think are quite wonderful, they've got the hands of peace here on the carvings, which is rather nice. Which almost, if you look at them in one direction, they look like the hands of peace, but if you look at it sort of face on, it looks like some kind of strange living creature. Because you've got the sort of the nose, the eyes, and the mouth there. So that's quite it's a very interesting, intricate design, which takes us back. If you look at the line of this, and you look at some of the Sumerian clay tablets and how they drew things, this is very Sumerian in its culture. It could almost be mistaken for being a shape of Ninhursag. As you can see, you've got some lovely, lovely colours on the stained glass windows here. Okay, we've got some lovely articles on the stained glass window. At the top, we've got a reference to the Fordham line, as we can see there. The Fordham lines have always had things of lions and moons and turrets and castles within their sort of shields and emblems. But they've also been associated in time with the little stag there. We can see on the bottom right-hand side, we've got the central stag. So we can certainly see the Desposny lines here, especially with regards to, again, we've got the reds and the whites of the Neville. We've got the sun on the left-hand side. So, you know, the sun and the light, as the light shall shine through upon the earth. And again, we come over to here, and a wonderful piece of artwork that occurred, and were obviously made around about 1680, as we can see. So in 1680, you can see the style of it's quite interesting that you've got the skull and crossbones within a sort of concentric circle, really, to be fair. So there's a lot of thought and effort gone into it. And the two guardians each side of that, guarding the way, guarding the passage. Leads to know is this wonderful stained glass window here within the church. And we can see right to the top there, I don't know how much we can actually focus in on that. We've got the Lamb of God at the top. And it's probably one of the only ones I've seen in a wonderful yellow stain. Let's not forget that the Lamb of God is a sacrifice to God. The sacrifice of an animal, a living creature, to spare another's life, as we know. So, is God vengeful? Yes. Is he healing? Debatable. Is he a jealous God? Of course. So in order to calm the elements, the Lamb of God has always prevailed, really, as some kind of recognition of God's greatness, his everlasting might and rule upon the earth, or over the earth, for want of a better term. Now again, we mentioned about the Clark family. What's quite interesting here, which is tucked in the corner, is we've got a lovely All Saints Clovelly from 1860, and it's actually presented by Mr. and Mrs. T.L.W. Clark. So you can see that was presented to the church by the Clark family, which is quite interesting, which makes that connection between the Clarks, the Nevilles over there, and the Fordhams, really. I'd say the three main lines have always been in bed with each other, as I say, since the dawn of creation, really. Great, so here we've got, again, probably the oldest piece in the church itself. We have, now what's interesting is we've got the white, now they are actually like a tulips at the bottom, they're not anything else but they're almost made to look like sort of doves at the same time, which is quite interesting. We've got the dove piece at the top left there of the artwork. We've got the royal seal being protected by the three guardians, the three angels there, the archangels. And the whole thing tells a wonderful story about the lady on the left is in prayer to God. The lady in blue is the humble one, and the lady in the red is the wealthy. So it's about the prayer of humble, and then on to the richness, the wealth. But what they're trying to portray here is that the wealth is not in the mundane world. The wealth is within the soul, within the belief, and within the understanding that one has. I mean, every time we visit one of these churches, I look at those and think, well, we have so many times where we go to churches and they're like today, they're empty, which is lovely for filming, but it isn't how it should be. Yes, we could argue that, find me under a rock and I shall be there, turn a stone and I shall be there, that we shouldn't need to have a building. But sometimes I think you need a focal point for a community to say, this is the place where we'll go to find some kind of sanctuary, some kind of peace, some kind of hope, faith and charity, to coin a phrase of the Masonic realm, I guess. Yeah. And this wonderful piece of stone and carvery work has moved around this church, oddly enough, 3 times. It's now laid at rest here, in this particular section. And what's quite nice is that you can see that someone's made the effort for the Easter time. And let's not forget that when we look at the biblical years to the truest years, they don't always line up. You know, we know that Christ was not born at Christmas. We know that he was born in July, per se. So it's all about representation, all about getting the understanding, making something tangible. The last piece would be the little piece of artwork over the top there. We can see the stained glass window. Very knightly virtues again, which is not a surprise for the area. Now, you won't be able to see it at the top there, but you've got the chalices. Now, the chalices are embedded, they're entwined, which is quite nice. There's two sets of chalices with wings almost, really. So it shows about how the mortal flesh can become the saintly virtue, can become the everlasting life.